I'm sitting here today with Reverend Dr. Joyce Dorsey. It's a privilege and an honor. I noticed that you went to Mother Emanuel's church the last couple of weeks. Can you tell me a little bit about the conference? And can you tie in Denmark Vinci with that church?
Well, naturally, he's one of the founders of that church by permission. And it is a church of magnificent African-American history in that at the time of the founding of the church, Charleston was majority black. And we know that religion was used to keep blacks under control. And certainly once African-Americans, now we call ourselves, realized that there were many things in the scriptures that were veiled or misquoted, and we no longer had the influence of just white mentality and suppression, but also the truth about what the scriptures revealed. And as history would have it, the realization causes anger, and naturally what follows anger sometimes is outburst and insurrection. And he, along with many who plotted a lot of the escaping from the misery of slavery and the aftermath, were executed.
If we look at history, and I know we hadn't talked about it, but it just came across my mind, Doctrine of Discovery. It was a paper that was written by the Pope, and he talks about, he gave it to explorers for them to, when they went out to explore the new lands.
Yes.
And he gave them permission. If anybody didn't look like you, talk like you, act like you can take this land. And it just appears that because we do not know our history,
Right.
we repeat it,
Right.
or we just go on the side of it.
Right.
But it's almost like saying, with the election
Yes.
coming up now,
Mm-hmm.
how do we bring the churches and the community into a fold? I have the churches as a community resource. What do we do? How do we do it? Where do we start?
You know, it's already started. There's a new awakening, and what we are seeing is through YouTube, some of it's misinformation, some of it's blown up, but through new channels of information, people are learning more about African American history than ever before. Naturally, books have been printed, but not all African Americans have been literate enough to understand the full message of many of our history books or references to how we got to this part of the earth, how we fell into slavery, how slavery was overcome, slavery itself, but the enslavement of the mind and the systems that have kept oppression in standard form. Those kinds of pieces of history don't necessarily exist in written form. No one wants to tell the truth. The truth is hard to digest, especially when you look at the evil acts that took place with lynchings, with massacres, with raidings of homes. Movies like Mississippi Burning a few years ago opened up a lot of eyes and caused anger amongst the viewers, whether they were white or black. And then of course you look at things like Roots, that may have been fictional in many ways, but certainly depicted a generality of the treatment of slaves, even the capturing of slaves. And also, now we read in history books, the magnificent kingdoms that existed in Africa before there was ever anything called enslavement. Yes, all society has done wrong to even its own kind. But we're talking about now the question of white supremacy versus the demeaning of the position of being black. Look at me. Should I be unequal? Look at my education, which is really beginning to depict where African American women who were demeaned real terribly during slavery and other eras. Look at us. We're rising, like Maya Angelou's book.
There was a lady in NAACP back in the early 80s. I think her name was Ruby.
Keep talking. Cause see, you
She
might be educating me too.
was in charge of the southeast region of
The NAACP.
NAACP.
Okay.
She's light skinned. She was on the cover of Jet some years ago.
Okay.
But I'm gonna go past that one a little bit. If we look at where we are today and getting ready to elect Donald Trump as the president, what are we gonna have to do to come and bring resources that we can educate and help one another?
We're going to have to get back to basics, because the money is not going to flow through programs like this. Not at the measure that we experienced when Lyndon Baines Johnson created this idea called a war on poverty. All of these other wars that have been taking place nationally and internationally have sucked up the resources that were intended for programs like this. And I would imagine with his liberal self, and I would call that a gift from God, because Jesus Christ was the number one liberal, you all, that there would have probably been some change in the landscape called poverty and lack, that the minimum wage might have come up to a livable wage way before now, and it still hasn't, and we're in 2016, almost 2017. So if we go back to 1965, when the dream of Martin Luther King was about to come alive, equality in many ways, better housing, better opportunities, and a chance for people to really be able to contribute to America without enslavement, white and black. These kinds of things would have become a reality, where then America would have been made greater, as the slogan goes.
It's almost like saying, if you look at resources, you talked about resources. How do we talk about resources and these issues? It's almost like saying we got the Attorney General to be session, trying to want to take us back to the 50s.
Yes.
We have to have some type of dialogue, some type of discussion.
Oh, thank you.
To make these changes.
Yes.
But it appears that we're not talking about it. Is it? And I'm just trying to find, what is it going to get people united? What's going to have to happen?
There's probably some sort of a revolution about to take place. Let's look at the recent election. Despite who the president is, the people have the biggest voice. Congress does not have the biggest voice. The people do. The people may not be able to vote on the laws, but the laws are going to have to reflect what the people need. If indeed this is going to be government by the rich, the poor will rise. They have done it before, not only in America, but any other country that has experienced the oligarchy taking control and suppressing everybody else, so that the rich will rise and the poor will serve. Well, I don't think America is ready for going back to that. And I don't want to suggest what could possibly happen, but all we have to do now is look back on history not only in this nation, but everywhere else on the planet where the poor have risen in opposition. We might see the Wall Street movement. We may see the Black Lives movement. We may see a lot of other movements where people have risen up. But what is really going to happen is all of those people are going to come together. And they're going to say, no, we are not going through this again. And it won't just be a civil rights movement. My fear, that's not my plan, but my fear is that even I, and people who know how to talk to people who are oppressed, will not make a difference.
True. And I know what it is that is missing. Because I do not know my history. The lady's name was Ruby Hurley. NAACP.
Okay, thank you.
Back in '65.
I need to look that one up. Yes.
She was regional director. She turned around and said, well, look, we're going to stop shopping for Christmas.
Yes.
All right? But what it ended up happening was, she went to the churches. The churches said no, it wouldn't go along with her. But 2 years later, she had the youth came back and they supported her and they did a boycott and they was able to make change.
Right.
And it's that I need to go back, we need to go back and look at who has done these things in the past to make these changes so we don't feel as if we are completely new at this.
That's right.
You know? But I look at what do you foresee happening in the coming months at the start of the new year?
Well, we'll probably start some more boycotts. We're already telling people, don't shop for Christmas gifts. You are still feeding the system. And you're on a fixed income, or you're on a low income, and you're buying gifts and things that cost more than they're worth, and you're going to be broke the day after Christmas. Your children may be happy because they got toys or things that were necessary, for that matter, to keep them happy, but they are going to suffer with hunger, dispossession, and lack for the next 6 months. And this is what is happening because it is the grassroots, the people who are earning the minimum income, working part-time hours, working for companies that have a bill